And we're doing it live. All right, so you've probably seen the Google algorithm leak information. I've been spending tons of time going through this stuff, trying to glean as many potential insights as one can get out of what's dropped. I think in general, probably one of the best like SEO data days we've ever had. Got to be one of the biggest data leaks that Google's ever had. So what I wanted to do for everyone out there is try to synthesize 18 of the best SEO lessons or tips that we can take out of this information and should really integrate into our SOPs. Probably 15 out of the 18 are things that most of the top 10 or 20% of SEOs are already doing. So there's no big surprise here. There are a few things that really improve the nuances of this. I would say that it's novel because there's new information. We know what kind of lingo Google uses internally. Over the next 3 to 4 months, the industry is going to be able to make a lot of connections from things that we already kind of knew and understood about the algorithm. So we will definitely expand our knowledge quite a bit. This is an interesting boon. I think it's fair to wonder how legit this is, if this isn't some kind of strange psyop, some kind of crazy PR move. There's a lot of random things this could be. I have a second video from yesterday, my initial kind of reaction when I was pretty exhausted, that gets into a lot of that kind of thinking. If you're more conspiratorial and you like that line and you want a nice download of what went down, that would probably be the video for you. This one, though, is going to be a little bit more focused, hopefully, than what I was producing yesterday, just because I was pretty exhausted at that point. So just for the context here before we hop into the tips. So Mike King dropped this post. Everyone should read it that is interested in this stuff, or you can just watch this video and the first video I put together, and then it'll kind of give you the core takeaways. Rand Fishkin also dropped it. This fellow right here, his name is Irfan Azimi, and he also runs an SEO agency, hilariously enough. So he's purported to not be the leaker, but he is the source of the leak. He sent it to Rand. And I think right now it's unclear whether or not he helped Mike King write the article that Mike King put together, or there was a third person who was already aware of this content independently and had been working on it. But I'm sure we'll kind of hear more about this story because it's probably one of the juicier SEO stories that has ever dropped. And I think probably one of the more compelling and interesting things I've seen in the time since I've been here. So the stuff came in. It initially was living over here, Content Warehouse API stuff. And so they have some of their stuff on these GitHub repositories, but not all of it's supposed to be there. I also wonder personally how they deal with Microsoft, because I think they own GitHub, right? So anyways, and then like this is a copy of the stuff that got leaked that wasn't supposed to have gotten leaked. And this is basically what the SEOs of the world have been going through up to now. So this stuff right here, all these APIs, all the modules, data documentation, this is all of the juicy details that we as an industry have been digging into. Now, this is kind of like the user manual of the Google algorithm. This isn't actually the Google algorithm itself, right? So that's kind of the thing to understand here. And, we've had leaks before, so this isn't the first time that we've gotten good information. None of this stuff's going to get confirmed, but a lot of the information we've seen before from leaks. Anyone in the industry, anyone who's been following the work of Bill Slawski or looking at the stuff that Correa's been doing more recently, like there's nothing really surprising here, but it does put the picture together pretty nicely, and I think settle some arguments, which is probably what the petty kings amongst us really appreciate about this moment, right? So that said, I think the real takeaway, hopefully, these tips should be useful to you or anyone else in the industry, and it should basically help us start to construct a slightly better understanding of what's happening in search, and hopefully execute more intelligently. So I would say if your SEO game isn't here yet, basically, this is a good opportunity and a good moment to really up the quality of what you're doing and what you've been doing in search. So let's hop into it. I hope that was a decent and not extremely long intro, because I'm very bad about this. So leak dropped night of May 27th. I already covered kind of the background here, and just in general, like, this is a victory lap for a lot of us SEOs out there that have already known this stuff and have had people try to quote Google liaisons and whatever, their PR people, to basically discredit what we know to be true, right? Number one, so Google has tiers and you basically want to target the best. So I think what a lot of the data has shown in general, right? Like we always talked about domain authority, it's a heuristic. Google's always denied there's any such concept, but then you wonder how a site like Forbes is able to rank, or how the entire concept of parasite SEO functions, right? And so there's reference to gold standard documents, which is very fascinating. And, I think it's a big old club of large corporations. You can look at some of the stuff that Glenn Alsop has done historically in terms of how very few corporations do tend to control a lot of the top rankings, and over time this has only gotten worse. Google is, of course, incentivized to promote high-performing large brands who can spend a lot. Don't forget, Amazon.com, the e-com store, was one of Google's earliest and biggest clients for a very, very long time, right? They definitely benefited from each other historically. Now, the kind of play here to understand is you want to be careful about how and where you're getting links from. You want to be in the higher tier. Google is tiered. It is not a pure meritocracy. So you can get far with SEO optimization, high quality content, keeping users happy, all these building blocks of demand fulfillment that we talk about a lot as an industry. But it's important to understand that you will be, if you are a David battling a Goliath, you are very much in that situation. You're not going to be able to write the best blog post ever and magically rank. That is just a reality of the system. There are literal tiers internally. They have concepts of gold standard content. And I think the advanced lesson is what you do as a starting off brand who is building as a startup is going to be markedly different than what you do as a more mature brand, or a brand that's been around for a while and has some site authority within the system, or even a brand that is trying to go from ranking number 3 to number 1. That in itself is a huge game and a huge challenge in the world of search. So at every tier, you are playing a different game, and there are tiers. It is not a pure meritocracy. The best does not win in Google. The most optimized, the most authoritative tends to win, unfortunately. Number 2, long live site authority. This, to me, the takeaway on the B2B SEO end for fintechs, anyone in the SaaS space, any of the sort of PE-driven companies out there, if you're ever doing a SEO migration domain merger, you absolutely want to work off of your best domain. The site authority is a real thing. And so outside of trying to preserve the brand intent, which I think should always supersede the SEO intent, you should basically front load. And, if you're having internal arguments about whether or not we should go from site A to B to C, or from, C to B to D, basically if site D has the highest domain authority, A, B, and C should all point to D. Like that's probably, that should already be your process, but I think this leak basically just lends more weight to that thought. The other thing, and this is probably the most novel thing that I saw, at least in my opinion, Google apparently tracks the last 20 changes that it sees on a specific URL. I think a very fascinating insight. The way that I would read that is basically, as a crawler, it's taking these snapshots, and the implication for us in the B2B SEO space is, number one, if we want to change Google's opinion, it seems like we need to go through a cycle of getting a page indexed 20 times to basically fully cleanse that snapshot within search. This should also influence how you think about link analysis, both in terms of it may not matter if a link falls out of the homepage. So if your boss is yelling at you, or you're mad at yourself from sort of losing your spot in the top place on a blog and you're kind of out of the news cycle, that will both take time to process into the algorithm, and it will sort of take time to fall out of the algorithm. So you need to specify a little bit of lag time into the system as you're evaluating and looking through this information. You should also be thinking about the recency and the sort of sticking power of the content you're producing. All of these things layer in together, but the 20 URL changes are tracked and the implications therein is a very fascinating insight that we got yesterday. Now, your brand authorship, it seems like EEAT is a real thing. I've been very skeptical about this as a metric historically. Looking at the docs, there are significant references to this in terms of science papers. I think that the authorship concept probably started from the news end in trying to deal with spam. But for the B2B companies out there, the fintech companies, the SaaS companies, like, you need to be building an internal content engine, right? And it needs to be programmatically designed by you in such a way that you have your internal content champions. So that could mean that our CEO is the head of anything related to topic X. Our CFO covers topic Y, and our head of marketing covers topic Z. And the point and value therein is that you're developing these authorship profiles that have some internalized value in them. Now, I think there's a lot to analyze here. I'm going to be honest, we might be jumping the gun a little bit here, but I do think it's pretty much confirmed as some sort of conceptual framework within the system, which is to say there probably isn't a one-to-one Google EEAT value that's running around, but it's probably fair to assume that you will benefit from having a better authorship profile and distribution and allocation across all of your blog posts on the site and as you're doing your external PR mentions. I think fintech this is probably one of the most common issues that we've seen and been grappling with, is the unwillingness to do any kind of ghostwriting or allocation of content to specific authors. It seems that in this B2B SaaS space, almost more than anywhere else, people want to have all the content be written by the team rather than by specific people. I think because 4 or 5 years ago, people were kind of more down to have guest post authors that they hired in, not do guest posts, but exist as journalists who wrote other places and also on their site. And I think there's been a fair backlash to that as brands because we want to be building our value. But either way, this is a lost opportunity. It's something that absolutely needs to be addressed in the B2B SEO space. And now we have a little bit more firepower for those arguments. If we're getting pushback from anyone, I think it's pretty clear right now that that information is out there and you should be acting accordingly. Got my man Matt Cutts in the top right for anyone who knows who that is still. So title tags do still matter. I am a big fan of title tags. I've always thought they have an outsized impact. It's always been good low-hanging fruit, cheap, cost-effective to make things happen, right? And I think what we've really seen here is that the keywords should be front-loaded. We already knew that. You want to keep them short. It doesn't really matter if they're too long, but ideally you're basically playing a CTR game. And so in the past, when people disagreed with me on this, I've always sort of just pointed out it is the primary thing that we're really able to leverage. It's the first entry point into the brand that most people see. It's nice to get a little bit of data backing here as to the fact that Google is leveraging title tags to match queries to specific pieces of content. So again, very big, very nice, convenient factoid that we've been able to bring into the mix here. And I'm quite happy to hear it, right? Ultimately, this is one of those things that I feel like I've spent too much of my life in silly arguments about this. So this is definitely an easy win I think we could have as an industry. I'm trying to figure out if I can get this to kind of center a little bit more nicely here. Is that bigger? I do not know, but I already... yeah, that's marginally bigger. We'll go with that. All right. So title tags matter, update them, leverage them, low-hanging fruit. A lot of B2B SEO spaces don't really support this, but it's a very valuable and easy thing to do and often quite easy to get lawyer approval on. So keep at it. There's definitely data-backed reasons why you'd want to leverage the title tags. Character length is irrelevant. Again, this is something that's probably well agreed upon by most people, but I do still get a lot of these crappy audits or clients hear something and they ask me about, like, oh, our title tags are supposed to be this and it's getting flagged in SEMrush or Ahrefs, like, why haven't we done this? And the answer typically just comes down to ROI. Like, yes, in an ideal world, we would optimize every single title tag and meta description and H1 length or whatever on the site. We do that thinking about the SEO implications, the CTR, the UX. But at the end of the day, we didn't see anything in the docs that involved anything around character length. It's unlikely there's any kind of test for that. I will say, though, that with a lot of these metrics, we've already, as an industry, kind of jumped up on the bandwagon as to what they mean and how big the implication is. I think to Iron Man, the argument against this stuff even being relevant, it's fair to have some conjecture as to maybe Google introduces these factors, tests them, and then never uses them. Some of the components within the 200 services that are kind of weaved together to create this giant content warehouse API that we're all analyzing right now do kind of lead me to believe, by the names, and I'll publish more about this in the future. I'm suspecting that they do have these, what do they call them? The twiddlers. They're literally called twiddlers. There's probably a few of these twiddlers that are focused on just making little tiny changes and tweaks to the fabric of search. But end of the day, your character length is a very useful heuristic. It can be a good way to sort of diagnose a lack of optimization or over optimization, but it really in itself does not mean anything. And so if you're choosing between some of the other things that I'm mentioning as positive benefit, good SEO moves to make, and spending time on just truncating length, you're gonna want to go for the other things that are listed in here, definitely. Number 7, visual HTML hierarchy. This was another one that was quite fascinating. I talked at length about it in the first video I made. The short answer, though, is as a rule of thumb, it would appear that the physical size on the screen of HTML elements actually has some effect on the performance or the weighting that Google gives to specific links. And so essentially what this means is you probably would benefit from having a link that is underlined linking to you more so than one that is not underlined, or a larger potentially H1 tag link than one that is not that large link. Now, probably doesn't matter if it's ginormous, it's probably a relative ranking. This all goes back to early Google spam efforts to weed out people just trying to bury millions of links before the system got more sophisticated. But this was one of the more surprising things. It probably is also fed by the fact that devs often use H tags as stylistic elements rather than hierarchical data organization elements, which is how SEOs tend to like to think about them. And it may just be the case that Google is having to make juice out of lemons, and this has gotten more sophisticated than it was originally intended to be. Number 8, technical SEO is technically very important, is still very, very important, right? So what we found from these docs is, if you're listening to any of the SEOs out there that are going deep, if you're looking at any kind of B2B SaaS optimization, you can actually get a lot of performance out of your baseline technical SEO work. The Google embeddings is real. I made a joke yesterday that Mike King's having the best week ever because he dropped an excellent article on Screaming Frog's new feature that lets you do JavaScript processing. And that in itself is a very powerful feature set to add into a lot of what we're already doing. Us that are on the more technical deep end of SEO, where we're like really digging into the pipes of the system. So the site focus score, the site radius score, it's just a very interesting system. This is probably the most helpful thing to see, because when we're doing these kinds of very deep SEO optimizations, this is where I wondered the most about our sanity. And are like, this is, we have the patent backup for it. We see the results, but as SEOs, this kind of, topical authority entity mapping, this is the fuzziest and craziest thing that we do. And I think this is where our brains get the most into the world of the algorithm. A lot of what you've seen in the last 5 years, and I think kind of what this video and a lot of the more emotional reactions from people that are enjoying this coming out is, like SEO, technical SEO has been treated like a checkbox. Like you can just run a Screaming Frog crawl and be done with it, or a SEMrush site audit will help you do it. And, in most cases, that will address or find 70-60% of the problems, but there is a significant amount of depth here, and it's very nice to see directly here that this depth is there. As a takeaway, I guess I would just say that in addition to monitoring your Screaming Frog, as anyone in the B2B SEO space should be doing, your indexing, your crawling, all that good stuff, you probably want to develop these skills, check out Correa's course, or just generally be investing in someone who gets into the weeds this deeply and can help you understand how to feed the Google algorithm exactly what it wants. Number 9, this one is actually, I think, one of the stranger things that we learned as well. So you do not want more than 50% of the site pages on your site to have videos, because Google will treat it as a video site, and I think we can think about that as it's probably a somewhat negative ranking factor. This is one thing that came out that I think the DOJ could sort of seize upon to say that Google is being anti-competitive. I think this probably would have started from adult content, and it probably would have been let to continue because there were YouTube competitors in the Google algorithm before, and I would have to guess this is some kind of way for them to basically make their video system the best video system. And there's probably still some implications on video sharing sites. We'll probably learn more about this, but what I would note is there's probably a lot of luxury brands out there, a lot of B2B SaaS and fintech companies, startups, etc., that have a few like nice videos, splashy backgrounds on their website. And these things could actually be hurting you, which is something I never would have guessed was a possibility before yesterday. So I think that in itself is quite fascinating. Number 10, register your domain names for longer. So host age does seem to be a metric within the system. This was something developed to combat PBNs and spammy sites. If you're building a link network, you obviously don't want to put out the funds for 5 years of domain registration if you can avoid it. I would say that this one seems to be a legit and awesome hack of all the stuff I've seen so far. This is something that hacky, I guess I would say grade a black hat SEO, like people that are willing to engage in the non-white hat SEO that Google would want us to do. Well aware of this. There's probably a lot of correlations, and it kind of makes sense as a factor. But for anyone trying to do business in B2B, trying to rank in B2B, this is a great hack. For an extra $50, you probably can give your site a little bit of extra shine in search, and who would have guessed? Number 11, this is a big one, pre-age your domains. So the sandbox is absolutely real. What this means for us as an industry, when you're going to do a site merger, not only does the site authority matter as covered in point number 2, but you basically want to pre-season the cast iron. You want to start working on your site before you actually launch it, which I know sounds a little bit insane, but in an ideal world, this is the way that I suggest we work, right? So if we have site A, site B, and we're changing it to new domain site C, the best case SOP should really be something like, when we know we're going to do the project at the we're going to do a site domain migration update project at the very, very start, and hopefully and I'm not going to say hopefully, but most likely it'll probably end up being 6 months to a year, given how a lot of web dev projects go from other agencies. We try to keep it in, our deliverable window of like a month if it's a rush project, or 3 months, or, like the but the point is that if you do it day one, just get a site up. Doesn't have to be pretty. No one's gonna know about it. Just, like, don't promote it, and then, fill it with 2,000 words about whatever it's going to be about. You don't have to indicate that it's your new domain. Just make sure the registration's private. This, I think, is like a killer SEO hack, right? This concept of the sandbox is a real thing, not just for kids and cats. Like, you build a site, doesn't matter how incredible it is, for 6 months to a year, it's probably not going to rank super well if it's any kind of competitive. This just seems to be a reality. Where this matters most is on the news end of things. I'm not as technically adept there, but there's also implications here for that. Probably for Google having to deal with fake news. And so there's layers to how the sandbox works and where it applies. But the takeaway on the B2B end is you should definitely be pre-aging your domains. Now, number 12, front load content quality. The interesting stuff. The answer to the question should be at the start of your blog post. The SEO AI footprint, if it hasn't already killed sites, is something like short meandering intro. It doesn't really make sense. A bunch of context for 200 words that kind of is useful but doesn't answer the actual topic. 700 words of light treatment of the topic that could be 300 words, and then a bunch of random crap capped off by an FAQ section that's just sitting there naked at the very bottom. Doesn't make a lot of sense conceptually. So hopefully you're not still doing that. You've sort of logically thought about what users would actually enjoy and how Google would probably suss out this stuff for a penalty. I guess the HCU, the helpful content update, already came out, so maybe it doesn't really matter. But what I would say is it's good UX. The way the insight we got yesterday is that Google Mustang, the system they use to assess stuff, basically truncates articles. So I would say, as a rule of thumb, try to have the answer, the value, the topic at hand covered in the first 300 words. If you get up to the gold standard content tier, you're probably going to have more leeway with that. But in general, you basically want to be getting into the meat and potatoes of it up front. That'll help Google as it's doing its early assessment, which is probably only a minute long, to get through that stuff. And then if it's good, they'll probably revisit it and it'll keep it in the sort of core algorithm system. What you don't want to do is be stuck in their Terra crawler system. So yeah, there's tiers to the algorithm. That's probably another video. But the point being that from what we learned yesterday, front load your useful content. It is better to be longer in general, but the value needs to be up front, and that's also just good UX. So I would keep it that way. Number 13, link building done poorly can really hurt you. So we've seen a lot of indications of this still being a factor, this still working its way through the Google system. The thing that I would say, and this has come up a few times with these notes and these tips that I've gotten as doing B2B SEO, it's very much the case that bad SEO can hurt you more than it helps. So Google was able to suss out the link velocity, the source type metrics. It's assessing the size of the HTML of these links. And again, I think it comes down to we have to tread a very careful line of trying to balance a natural link building profile with consistent velocity, but also knowing that probably only our mid and high tier links actually matter. These are very challenging things to keep in place. I've often, I try to, one of the floors that you might compare us to is like an SEO consultant or agency versus another investment in dollars for SEO is like, what if I just threw all my money in link building, right? And the question should be, am I as an SEO better than the client just taking all the money they would give me and just dumping it into links? I think from what I've seen, this kind of answers the question. And of course, it very much is a scalpel. So you can hurt the site more than you can help it. But there's significant things that can be damaging and challenging with link building. If you're going to do it, be thinking about these topics, do your research. otherwise hire an expert, you have a lot of potential to hurt your site, especially in the B2B space where links are even more difficult to come by if you don't know what you're doing. But they're very clearly also in the algorithm. It very clearly still has an impact. It still matters quite a bit. So this stuff is the real deal. There is a lot happening on the link building end of things. So anyone in the B2B SEO space, you should be leveraging link building. Obviously, Google can never really get away from it. Number 14, URL recency matters. Update your published dates consistently. You want to make sure Google has these data types for byline date, syntactic date, semantic date. You basically, number one, want to make sure the HTML on your site for date exists, is accurate, is cohesive across the board. And number two, update your content. It's one of the easiest SEO content marketing hacks out there right now. Every 3 months, put it on your calendar, update your content consistently. There are quite a few interesting plugins that are in this. Like, there's so many ways to do it now. The other hack is, even if you don't want to do what I'm saying, where you have an aggressive updating schedule, just hop into SEMrush, look at what was ranking 2 years ago or a year ago, look at what's not ranking now. And if you go and do very cursory changes, 5-10%, it's different, it's better, it's unique, but it's better. It's new, boom, update your date, you will see a boost. This has been one of my favorite little SEO hacks in the last 4 or 5 months. It's probably been in the system longer than that, but the date, the recency of your content matters. And this also applies to links, right? So going back to this concept of there being tiers of quality in search, you want to be getting recent links that will have more beneficial impact than going out and getting what people call niche edits, topical keyword insertion in articles that already exist. This is kind of a surprising point, right? Because in my view, also, if Google has indexed and kept a link in its system for longer, that should have a higher value. I've read that Google is sort of reducing its link index time to like a 13-month sweet spot. And I would also note that there's been reports of the links that people see in Search Console diminishing over, quite recently, significantly. I don't really trust anything Google says, so I use Search Console, but always correlatively. I never hang my hat on it. But either way, URL recency is a very, very important factor that you should be thinking about. Number 15, bad SEO can hurt more than it helps. I've already touched on this a little bit, but conceptually, there are demotions and penalties inside of search. You can get demotions for bad links. Google is supposedly able to weed out exact match domains, which they really can't. It still works quite well, especially in local SEO. They're looking for anchor mismatch, SERP dissatisfaction, bounces. Again, CTR really does matter. All of these things are still there in the system, right? At the end of the day, they're tracking this stuff. And the surprising thing to me, at least, that conceptually we probably all knew, but it's nice to have confirmed, is that there are a bunch of different systems Google has in place that will actively harm a site that is tripping the wire on spam or any of these other user issues out there. And it makes sense because they obviously have to keep us from winning. They don't want us to win, right? So this stuff is, I think, just good to know, obvious, but it's nice to get clear confirmation that this very much is a thing. Number 16 is probably one of the spiciest. So, most SEOs, I think most people that ever think about SEO would intuitively understand that Google has to use CTR data. They have to, Rand Fishkin's talked about pogo sticking, I think going back to like 2015 and probably before, and it's in the patents, blah, 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 blah. They've always denied it because it is so incredibly powerful. But what was shocking, I think, from what came out yesterday is that Google is leveraging Chrome user data, it seems like almost exclusively. And so when we're doing B2B SEO, that then begs the point, we maybe should only be looking at Chrome users on our site, right? When we're assessing and making decisions, at least from the lens of SEO, you might want to have your Chrome filter on, right? That's where the data is going to be most accurate, most heavily impacting your performance in search. If you practice the dark arts and are using any of these CTR tools, you very much want to think about the fact that, number one, I'll say this: you absolutely can decimate your site with CTR. That is one of the negative SEO hacks that still works very well, right? But Google is looking for and searching for real user profiles, and they're doing it on Chrome, and they are utilizing the CTR data from this information and the Chrome view data to assess users. This is something that they've obviously denied for a long, long, long time. We don't use Google behavior for rankings, blah, blah, blah. We don't use CTR for core ranking algorithms. John Mueller, what is this quote here? I don't think this is going back to January 7th, 2022, which really isn't that far ago in the world of SEO. I don't think we use anything from Google Chrome for ranking. Lie. So the only thing that happens in Chrome is for the pages experience report. We use Chrome user experience report data, which is kind of the aggregated data and user saw when they went to the website in regards to page experience specifically. And I think that's the only thing that we use for Chrome within rankings. To be fair, he thinks. Nothing confirmed either way. But again, we all knew that they were using the CTR data. It's obvious. It's what any of us would do if we were designing an algorithm. And ultimately, it's their only advantage. It's part of this massive AI data set they should have been using to train the best AIs before, right? So, the end point with that is Chrome users on your site probably matter a lot more than you would have thought, than I would have thought last week. I would have thought Google had a more sophisticated and nuanced system and approach to this, but I'm willing to bet that, I'm gonna say I'm probably gonna weight my decisions more heavily towards what Chrome users are doing on sites than anything else moving forward. Number 17, ignore the disavow tool. There's no reference of this within the documents, and I think it's probably fair to assume that if you don't know what you're doing, you should probably stay far, far away from it. There's a lot of contention as to whether it has any impact. I do still think it's an impact, and I think it's generally negative. Part of me almost wonders if at this point, if you even use the tool, that might ding you more than anything else. I think generally what happens is that people don't think about the fact that there's so much spam that Google baked into the system when they were training a lot of these ML and AI models back in the day, that, this stuff is just, you need it to have a natural link profile. Number 18, in the B2B SEO content marketing space, you can still use the quality rater guidelines. So Google has sort of couched this as the quality raters are out there to assess the quality of the algorithm, and it doesn't really get integrated into the algorithm, but it clearly affects how the gold standard content gets rated and ranked. And then that obviously sort of trickles down to the rest of us. Oh, give us money, Google. Traffic, Google. But the point being, quality rater guidelines are useful for anyone out there. There's quite a few good articles on this topic. You can go and leverage that content, and you can really, I think, make some effective, some solid conclusions from that. Leverage that information to go and produce better and better content. Alrighty. Conclusions. So at the end of the day, the leak is quite fascinating. I don't think it changes anything for any sort of experienced SEO out there, anyone sort of related to it. A lot of these things are already best practices. And Google ultimately chases human satisfaction. They want to sell ads to people. They need to have people keep coming back to their product. And so if you please users, you will be doing the same thing that Google is chasing. And so you can save a lot of this SEO intricacy if you can do that. But obviously, our whole industry is predicated on throwing a little bit of extra butter on that bread, right? And then, number two, of course, Google lied. We should not exist. SEO shouldn't be able to do what it does. We undermine the overall conceptual underpinnings of their entire business model, which is that we have an impartial, perfect system that we Google, we're going to undermine our own system with ads. That's all right. We're gonna make it so that every mobile SERP is 90% ads, and you probably can't even see an organic listing until 2 or 3 thumb scrolls. That's all right. SEO isn't a thing. You guys can't do anything. Blah blah blah. It only exists so far as We use SEO to help make our job of categorizing content easier, but you can't improve rankings. But obviously, that's like what we do. Third thing I would say is there were some interesting revelations. I think we'll have some more interesting ones come out, but this was just a victory lap for a lot of us out there. This was us winning arguments that our more gullible colleagues and related folks didn't believe us on, and now we got the data, we got the receipts. So that's really it. I think the two most startling things to me personally, number one, very little has changed inside of Google search. A lot of the patent work that we were looking at, that is 18 years old, is still accurate and still high quality. And really, the system, I think, has maybe gotten more sophisticated in some of the nuance and sort of realizing some of the ideas that were in early patents, but it's not 10 times better than it was even 4 years ago, before everyone started to really think Google's ad ratio to organic had gone, like you can't get a straight answer out of Google anymore. But for a lot of queries, you can't. Point being, it's stunning how the system is very much a bunch of different components that have been stacked on top of each other. I almost doubt whether anyone fully understands what's going on under the hood. And the implication of that would have been 3 months ago, like, yeah, they're really struggling as a company. They're too focused on profits. They got too lazy sucking up easy profits, and they were the company that should have developed AI. It's probably more of historically, this will probably go down as a bigger fumble than Kodak not being the ones to really develop and monetize digital imaging. Anyways, that's a discussion for another day. The second thing I would say is the level of data siloing was actually quite impressive. So I was surprised that we didn't see more anti-competitive, the stuff that makes antitrust lawsuits from the government. Didn't see a lot of that. Like, I think if we saw this from Facebook, we would absolutely have seen, like, here's how we turn the mics on to record your conversations and figure out what to sell to you. May or may not be real. I think it's probably real. But point being, the sort of end point here, it's a startling moment. This is very much like the emperor has no clothes. It's just the way the system's built. The SGE patent I was looking at today, the AI system is another separate module that's been strapped on top of this, whereas it should have been the uniting force of the ecosystem, and it should have stripped down and simplified and improved the quality of it all. Yeah, it's very fascinating. Google has not been as aggressive, as invasive as I would have assumed they would be, which is kind of funny because that was really a lot of the underpinnings of dropping this information. And then number two, it's just hasn't changed a lot. I don't think it's gotten radically better. It's gotten larger, it's gotten more nuanced, it's gotten more complex, but it hasn't gotten, it's not a 10x better product than it was a few years back. So anyways, hopefully these B2B SEO tips are helpful to you. Sources and data is included all in here. You should be able to jump to those links. And again, probably not a lot of hugely revelatory thing for anyone who's a actually good SEO and is experienced, but these are 18 solid takeaways. I think we can hang our hats on this stuff as, like, these are process changes that we can probably make, updates to our thinking that we can probably make as to how Google works. And these algo leaks probably confirm a lot of what some have considered SEO theories. And so you can basically go forth and just action, you can basically trust that these will probably be the best courses of action. And, there's definitely some solid hacks in here and some more that will come up. My name is Shaheen Adibi. I am a SEO nerd and I love this stuff way too much. Making these videos on the late night, but yeah, B2B SEO, so much magic out there. I'm not foolish enough to drop revenue stats on the internet. I think that's insane. And yeah, but we do it. Oh, here we go. This is the one I wanted. So, end credit roll. Google is more sophisticated than the naive amongst us would think, and much more simple than the paranoid would assume. I'll leave you with that to ponder.